A year ago, I made a decision that I want to describe accurately because the honest description of the decision and its consequences is more useful than the polished version that either side of the Linux-Windows debate would prefer. I switched to Linux exclusively for my work, not for hobby projects. Not for my personal machine in addition to a work Windows machine. For the work I do professionally, which involves client deliverables, collaboration with teams that use mixed environments, and a full range of productivity and creative tasks that my role requires, I moved to Linux and stopped using Windows entirely. I did this not because I expected it to work perfectly, but because I wanted to test, through my own experience, whether the claims that Linux is now viable for professional work were accurate. The test has now been running for a year. I have enough data to describe what actually happened, where it worked, where it did not work, and what a reasonable person would conclude from the experience. The honest description, which is the point of this video, is that Linux has been a viable platform for my work, in most respects, with specific exceptions that I will describe in detail. The exceptions matter, and pretending they do not exist would be dishonest. The successes matter too, and pretending they do not exist would also be dishonest. Let me describe the work I do, because the details affect the applicability of my experience to other users. My work involves writing, editing, and delivering content in various forms. I work with text documents, spreadsheets, presentations, and images. I collaborate with clients and colleagues through email, chat, video calls, and shared document platforms. I use specific domain tools for specific parts of my work. I deliver files in formats that clients expect, including Microsoft Office formats, PDF, and various media formats. The work I do does not involve specialized Windows-only software in the sense that some professional fields do. I do not work with specific engineering tools that require Windows. I do not work with proprietary enterprise software that has no Linux equivalent. My work is more like general office work with specific content production on top, which means my experience is more applicable to knowledge workers than to users in fields with Windows-only software requirements. My specific Linux setup is Fedora Workstation on a ThinkPad. The choice of Fedora reflects a preference for recent software with stability, and the choice of ThinkPad reflects a preference for hardware that has good Linux driver support. Other distributions and other hardware would have been reasonable. These were the choices I made. Let me describe what worked because this is most of the year's experience. The core productivity tools worked well. LibreOffice handles most of the document work I needed. The specific exceptions, which I will address later, are real but limited. Thunderbird handles my email and calendar needs. Firefox handles web browsing and the many web-based tools I use throughout the day. VS Code, which is available on Linux, handles any text-based work that goes beyond what LibreOffice does. The core tools that make up my daily workflow all run well on Linux. Video conferencing worked well in most cases. Zoom has a native Linux client that has been reliable. Jitsi, which I use for some specific meetings, is Linux native and works beautifully. Microsoft Teams, which some clients use, has a Linux version that is adequate for basic use, though it has specific limitations I will describe. File handling and collaboration worked well. The file formats I exchange with clients, including Microsoft Office formats, open correctly in LibreOffice for most cases. The exceptions are specific and I will describe them. Shared document platforms like Google Docs, Microsoft 365 Online, and various collaboration tools work in the browser, which is agnostic to the operating system. Image work, which is a part of my workflow, has been well supported. GIMP handles most of what I would have done in Photoshop. Inkscape handles what I would have done in Illustrator. For specific professional requirements that these tools do not address, I have used DaVinci Resolve for video and Krita for some specific image work. The open source creative tools have reached a level of capability that covers the vast majority of what I need. Specific automation and scripting work has been easier on Linux than it was on Windows. The tools that modern scripting depends on, including command line utilities, version control, and various language runtimes, are native on Linux. Setting up development environments has been faster and more reliable than it was on Windows. The ecosystem that I use for automation has moved quietly toward Linux over the years, and the daily experience on Linux is noticeably smoother. Now, let me describe what has not worked as well. Specific Microsoft Office documents with complex formatting sometimes render imperfectly in LibreOffice. For most documents, the difference is imperceptible. For specific templates that clients use, the rendering can be off in ways that matter. My workaround has been to run Microsoft Office itself through Crossover, a commercial wine-based tool for the specific documents that require exact rendering. This is a specific friction that Linux-only purists would prefer not to have, but the alternative of accepting imperfect rendering is not acceptable for client work. Microsoft Teams, which I mentioned as adequate for basic use, has specific limitations on Linux. The screen sharing works, but with specific limitations. Some collaboration features are not available. Meeting controls that exist on Windows are sometimes absent or different on Linux. For meetings where Teams is the required platform, and I need full functionality, I have occasionally fallen back to a Windows virtual machine or to the Teams web client, neither of which is as smooth as the native client on its home platform. Specific enterprise integrations that some clients use have been difficult on Linux. A few clients use secure document sharing platforms that do not have Linux clients. A few clients require specific VPN configurations that are easier on Windows. A few clients use screen recording software for documentation that is Windows only. For these cases, I have either found alternative tools or have maintained a small Windows virtual machine that I use only for the specific client-required activities. Hardware support has been mostly good, but not uniformly so. My specific ThinkPad has excellent Linux support. Some peripherals I have connected have required more setup than they would have on Windows. A specific printer I use required some driver configuration. A specific camera required a specific driver package. These were addressable, but they required attention. Gaming and entertainment on the work machine, which is a minor consideration but still relevant, has been mixed. Steam games work well. Some specific entertainment applications that I occasionally use have been less smooth. Streaming services with DRM have worked at lower quality than they would on Windows, as I have covered in other videos. For a work machine, these limitations are minor, but they are real. Now let me describe what I have learned. The specific friction points are real. Pretending that Linux is a drop-in replacement for Windows would be dishonest. There are specific things that are harder on Linux, and users should understand what those things are before making the switch. The specific friction points are, however, manageable. Every specific problem I have encountered has had a workaround that is acceptable for my work. The cumulative effect of the friction is measurable, but not debilitating. The gain in privacy, in control, and in the absence of commercial defaults fighting my preferences has exceeded the cost of the friction for me. The specific friction points are also decreasing over time. The Linux ecosystem has improved in most of the categories where I had issues during the year. LibreOffice compatibility has improved. Microsoft Teams on Linux has improved. The tools for handling Windows-specific software on Linux have improved. A user making the switch today would have slightly less friction than I had a year ago. The specific requirements of different work matter. My work does not require specialized Windows-only software. Many jobs do. Users in fields with specific software requirements should check whether their specific tools work on Linux before making the switch. For some users, the answer will be that Linux is not viable. For other users, including me, the answer is that Linux is viable with specific workarounds. The specific personality fit with Linux matters. Linux rewards users who are curious about their computing environment, who are willing to solve problems when they arise, and who value control. Linux is frustrating for users who want an operating system that works in the way they expect without any involvement on their part. My personality is the former. The switch has been rewarding for me. Users with different personalities may find the switch more frustrating. Subscribe for the next video, which describes the specific tools I use in my daily workflow on Linux, including the alternatives to Windows-specific applications, the automation tools that make my work faster, and the specific configurations that minimize friction. And in the comments, tell me what field you work in and what specific software requirements you have. The question of whether Linux is viable for specific work is highly context-dependent, and the specific answers for specific fields are more useful than general claims.